Architectural photography looks at man-made structures encompassing everything from skyscrapers to a flight of stairs. Architectural photography aims to create an aesthetically pleasing representation of the subject. I wanted to first focus on the work of Lucien Hervé, originally Laszlo Alkan, a French photographer who was born in Hungary August 7, 1910. He was best known for his work for the architect Le Corbusier. He initially began as a photographer for a French periodical Marianne, but soon found himself as a military photographer during World War II, where he ended up as a prisoner of war in 1940. Once he escaped, he joined the resistance and adopted the pseudonym of Lucien Hervé. He began to take photos for several magazines and soon met Father Couturier, who introduced him to Matisse and Le Corbusier. The end of 1949 marked the beginning of his career as an architectural photographer. Le Corbusier asked Hervé to become his photographer after sending 650 prints of Le Corbusier's building Unité d'Habitation. The two worked together until Le Corbusier's death in 1965. The context of the photos I'm about to analyze is an individual client, Le Corbusier. It's important to note that Lucien Hervé was quite a prolific photographer and took several hundred images for each building he photographed. He took photos from multiple perspectives to imitate walking through the buildings as well as create cinematic visual experiences unfolding over time. So while taken out of context the photos seem obscured, several of them put together create a visual story and help encompass the entire structure. This is an image of the High Court of Justice in Chandigarh, designed by Le Corbusier. Along with the building, he also included a person, a tree, and a hill. Despite this, I believe the application is still an architectural image, as the subject is still the structure and the tree and person are there as part of the composition in order to highlight the building and its features. Because the person and tree are there, you are able to compare and imagine the scale of the structure, and this emphasizes its height and size. The juxtaposition between nature and Le Corbusier's building makes this image visually interesting. The natural curves of the tree juxtaposes the angled and defined edges of the building. The simplicity of the tree in isolation in comparison to the patterns of the building filling up the image emphasizes the grandness of the structure. The negative space near the trees also brings focus to darker areas of the building and brings balance to the image, as there isn't much fight for focus. The harsh shadows highlight how Hervé's photographic style complements and helps to accentuate Le Corbusier's modernist visions. This image of Le Corbusier's building highlights its modernist aesthetics. Its very geometric structure looks as though it has been inspired by de Stijl, an artistic movement formed in 1917. The strong shadows which hide the details of the building also help emulate this reduced quality that was often present in de Stijl artwork. The contrast between light and shadows helps accentuate the edges and corners of the structure, making them look sharper. The low angle helps to create the impression that the structure is taller and stronger, like it's towering over those who view this image, and adds depth, making it look more visually interesting. The image itself is dynamic, filled with constant change, especially in regards to the directions of the lines. This image is a close-up of one of the arches in Le Thornet Abbey. This building was not Le Corbusier's work, but it had a strong influence on him. The application here is an architectural photo, as the subject is a man-made structure, and it also is part of a building. The harsh shadows formed through high contrast highlight the edges and shapes in the building by acting as negative space. The arch and the light falling on the wall help our eyes move through the image. The sharp contrast alongside the deep depth of field obscures the audience's perception of depth, but ultimately gives us an idea of the volume of the structure. During his trip to Le Thornet Abbey, Le Corbusier observed, "The light and the shadow are the loudspeakers of this architecture of truth." I feel that Lucien Hervé was really able to prove this through the image. You can see little crevices and flaws. The image seems slightly overexposed, but you can see the texture, the shadow and light, and they all help to give insight into the structure of the building within a very minimalistic image. Another architectural photographer I wanted to look at is Yener Turan. Based in Istanbul, Turan photographs a less-known side of Istanbul's architecture in hopes to change the one-dimensional perception of the city and show that there is more to Istanbul's architectural scene than old historical buildings. The context of these photos are quite different to the previous photographers I have analyzed, as his work is created for Instagram, a social media platform. This image is one example of Turan's work. The color and structure of the building are quite striking and contrast our traditional view of Istanbul. We can see that in regards to composition, Turan's image fits more conventions of photography compared to Lucien Hervé, as the context of Turan's work means he needs to be able to appeal to a wide audience, as opposed to Lucien Hervé, who was photographing for a specific client and was trying to bring out their vision. The use of the rule of 3 makes the image more visually appealing, and the gradual decrease in size between each balcony helps lead our eyes through the image. The palette of the photo is made up of red and yellow. While they are both warm colors, the contrast of the red brings our eyes to the balcony initially, meaning that the colors don't fight for your attention and work well together. There is also a shadow which disturbs the symmetry but adds depth to the image. The shadow of this person on the side messes with the geometrical image and softens it with their curves. However, while it could soften the image, I think it could work the other way and make the image structure seem more sharp, through the juxtaposition between the person's curves and the building's defined corners and edges. So, while some could argue the shadow doesn't fit into the application of architectural photography, I think this still is an architectural photo because our focus is on the actual structure rather than the person. The shadow is just an added element to add character to this image and make it feel more organic. The two photographers' styles are vastly different, the most obvious aspect being color. Hervé's images are all black and white, along with the fact that color photography wasn't popularized in the mid-20th century. The monochromatic palette was appropriate for the context of his images, an individual client Le Corbusier, who wanted photographs that focused on the architecture. In this case, color could potentially have been distracting, had Hervé tried to use them. The black and white palette also gave Lucien Hervé's photos a more sleek and refined look and added to the obscurity of the photo, which made it more visually interesting. As for Turan, the purpose of his images were to promote Istanbul's colorful buildings, so the vibrant palettes were appropriate for this image. He uses a lot more conventional compositional techniques in order to appeal to a wider audience, considering the fact that his context is Instagram, a social media platform. The two photographers are a great example of how the same application can result in vastly different photographs through the context of the work produced.